G'day ladies and gents, and welcome to Rise of Flight with Mags. So as I mentioned in my last War Thunder video, I've actually come down with a flu and I've lost my voice. Well, I've lost most of my voice. I didn't want to leave you guys without any content, however, so I've chosen to put this up. Now, the reason why I'm putting this particular first mission of the campaign in Rise of Flight is there's no combat. There's very little for me to actually talk about the whole way through, which will make it a bit easier for me to get through on it. Now, at the start of the campaign, you are literally a brand new recruit. You've just joined Jasta 13, and your first mission is quite literally to fly to a neighbouring airfield and pick up some schnapps so the officers of your squadron can celebrate the arrival of the new pilots in the age-old tradition of getting drunk. Now, as always, I play with full simulation settings, so everything is set to maximum realism. However, this time I am playing with markers on, and that is because I'm a little bunged up, and my eyes are playing up as a result. Those of you who have been with the channel for a while are aware of my eye condition. It's giving me issues at the moment while I've got the flu, so the markers are just making things easier. I'm also running with the HUD on for exactly the same reason. The second reason I've got the markers up is I actually want you to have a close watch of how they operate. This is something that I would like to see applied to that other game that I regularly post on the channel. It's a very interesting way of doing the markers. So for those of you watching who have seen Rise of Flight before, you know exactly what's coming. You've probably played this mission yourself. For those of you who have thought about taking a look, enjoy a nice quiet look around at Rise of Flight. Possibly the best, well, actually I don't think there's possibly about it. In my opinion, this is the best World War I combat simulator ever created. I'll pop back on the mic from time to time to point things out here and there. Enjoy the flight. The red dot ahead of the aircraft is a waypoint navigational marker that's only visible when the HUD is activated. If you are playing with all the HUD disabled in full pure realism mode, that dot isn't visible. Much like the markers for aircraft aren't visible. You have to navigate the waypoints by using the map, using the compass, and identifying terrain features. Now the game engine that we're playing inside of here is actually exactly the same engine that is used in IL-2, Battle of Stalingrad and the upcoming Battle of Moscow. 777 Studios that actually creates Rise of Flight is also responsible for the creation of IL-2. Now this is what I wanted to talk to you about with aircraft markers. Now we've just got our first two markers up there. You'll see the two black dots just to the left-hand or left of center of the screen at the moment. Now you'll notice that those two dots are black or dark grey. This is because why the marker system has indicated that there are two aircraft at that location, I'm still too far away to identify them. Now eventually I'll get to a range close enough where those markers will change and either turn red or blue depending on whether or not the aircraft is friendly or hostile. And from there I get closer again and I'll get an identifier to give me the name of the aircraft. Now the thing with this is, I will almost be in gun range before those markers change from grey to blue or red. So even with the markers I need to take an educated guess on whether or not those are hostile fighters or not. Now, I won't get the name of the aircraft that I'm engaging until I'm close enough that if I have any knowledge of aircraft, I should be able to visually identify the aircraft in the first place. Now these two aircraft are friendly Fokkers. If they were engaged with, say, a pair of Sopwith pups, however, I would get 4 grey target markers. And I wouldn't be able to tell who is who until I got close enough, basically to within engagement range, before I would be notified on exactly what aircraft are on my team and what are not. So I would need to take a guess. Now I just want you to visualize for a second what this would mean in, say, War Thunder realistic battles, where if you got target markers and you were outside of, say, 2 kilometers range, you actually didn't have a friendly or hostile marker. It was just a grey marker to indicate that there were planes engaged in a fight. You wouldn't know who had the upper hand unless you were communicating with your own team. Then if you were in, well, you wouldn't get a name on who was flying the plane, or what the plane even was, until you were within gun range of the aircraft that you were moving to engage. You would actually visually identify the aircraft faster than you got notified of the name. It's a real shame that War Thunder's custom battles don't have options to try something like this out. I would be really interested to see how it would affect the dynamic of realistic battles. I think it would be quite interesting to see in action. But that's enough about War Thunder. We're currently on our descent path towards the Allied base we're going to pick up the Schnapps from. If you check out the river below and you look closely, you'll actually see small boats transiting up and down the river. Some of them might have markers on them. We're probably flying too high to see, but if you were also keeping a track of the roads as we've been flying, and if we were low enough, you may have been able, well, you're still from this altitude, you may be able to spot the dots on them of actual supply trucks and convoy trucks that are moving around the battlefield. There is constant activity on the ground all the way through the map. You'll just stumble across enemy convoys, or you'll be flying over the top of a flak barge that's on your team, so you can potentially drag fighters that you are currently engaged with over the top of it and get some AAA support. Rise of Flight does have some very nice environmental details that increase immersion. Now I'm currently just spiraling the aircraft down to drop some altitude. If I was to dive directly down onto the runway, I would rip the wings off this aircraft. If you've seen my recent airshow video, the section where I had the mock World War I battle, you would have noted World War I aircraft were not incredibly fast. There's a reason why they didn't try to fly them fast. Well, look at the wings, you can see what holds this plane together. Put too much stress on it and this plane will just disintegrate mid-flight. Actually, while we come into land, it's probably worth actually talking about the damage models in Rise of Flight. They are advanced. Coming from the guys that made the flight models for IL-2 Sturmovik, I'm sure you've seen how some of the planes disintegrate on that. It's much the same here. The wing sections of the aircraft are not treated as a single wing. Each of the panels is individually modelled. The struts also have their own stress tolerances, so an individual strut or a group of struts can break under stress, which will cause the wing underneath to weaken and eventually flex and be torn off. It won't immediately break off. Sometimes they can stay on for some time, throwing the aircraft off balance before the wing will just rip off in flight. The engine is divided into internal components. Internal components can all be damaged. All of the cables that control the control surfaces are all modelled and can be broken in combat. Each of the control surfaces are modelled individually, as well as the hinges that attach them to the aircraft. So those hinges can fail without the control surfaces technically taking damage under stress. Also, all of the individual parts of the aircraft, the actual framework that makes the aircraft itself, is modelled and given stress tolerances based on the real-world material that it's actually made out of. The individual type of wood is taken into account that was used to construct the aircraft. So it's pretty safe to say that the damage models are actually quite advanced. Now I was going slightly too slow here and starting to get a little bit of a stall on in that turn. I'm going to go wide out over the forest and give myself a nice long run up. This thing doesn't need a huge amount of space to put down, but it does have a lot of torque in the engine. As I back the engine off coming into land, the plane will throw itself around a little bit, so I like to have a little bit of space to correct myself if needed. Yeah, I think he's right. It was a pretty decent landing. I wouldn't say it's my best or smoothest landing, but it did the job. No damage to the plane. And yes, now it actually has the windsocks model, and that's the point that I have to go over to. There will be a car waiting for me that'll have the Schnapps, and from that point I can take off and head on my way again. Now the windsocks are actually rather important in Rise of Flight because wind is modelled. You do get crosswinds, so taking a look at the windsocks before you take off is usually a fairly good idea, as it will tell you where the winds are coming from and what's going on around you, so the plane doesn't get tipped over as soon as you try and take off. In fact, most of the crashes you have, if you give Rise of Flight a crack, when you're trying to take off very early on, will be because you're trying to take off in a crosswind and the plane is simply getting tipped over as soon as it clears the ground. So right there you can see the windsock and the vehicle that is waiting for me with my package. Now I'm taxiing off fairly wide here before I bring it back around. Important thing to remember, being a sim, there is no respawn on the ground, and this thing doesn't have reverse. If you taxi directly up to the windsock and you don't allow enough space to turn the plane back around, you will smack into a building, you will destroy the aircraft, and that is a mission failure. So you have to be careful on your taxiing and make sure you're in a position where you can easily turn the plane back around and point it back down the field ready for takeoff again. Now I was just taking a look at the windsock as I was approaching in. It looks like I get a very, very gentle southwest. Not enough that it should affect takeoff, so I should be able to spin this plane out, point it in any direction I like and get off the ground without too much of an issue. If that windsock is out in the horizontal, you've got to pay a lot of attention to which direction it's pointing and always try and take off in the direction the wind is coming from. Oh yeah, why I'm thinking about it, that's something that might catch a few people out who have never really seen how World War I operated before. There's a reason why runways are also called airfields. In World War One, that's literally what they were. They were a field with a bunch of buildings on it and planes. There was no actual runway. You took off on the dirt and grass. Well, that's not exactly true. There were some runways, but they were relatively rare. So that's all I had to do to pick up the package. The package is collected, it's in the plane. Just look at some of the model details here. The buildings in the background are fairly low detail, fairly basic, but this is the detailing on some of the aircraft and the vehicles that are on the ground. Rise of Flight isn't a new title. This is actually fairly impressive for a sim of its age, and to think that this exact same engine is being used in IL-2 when you look at the detailing on some of their aircraft and their ground vehicles, it's quite an impressive engine. Now, while I was taking a look around, I was actually waiting. You would have seen as I pulled up there was a green flare that was fired off. Those flares are fired to signify whether or not an aircraft that's approaching the airfield is friendly or hostile. A green flare going up while I'm on the ground meant that there was an aircraft coming in and it had been identified as a friendly aircraft. I was just giving it some space if it was coming into land, but it looks like it isn't. Nobody's on the ground, so let's fire up the engine and we'll get back in the sky. And from this point it was pretty much the same uneventful trip on the way home, although there was a few things to spot. If you look down there on the water, that's one of the flak barges that's travelling up and down the river at the moment. Now, as you can see, it's got a blue indicator, so I know it is a German flak barge, so it's perfectly safe to be near. However, keep in mind that there are Allied flak barges on the rivers as well, and if you get close to those, yeah, you're in a world of trouble. It looks like that Fokker patrol that I detected earlier on is still cruising about, just sitting above the clouds again. I've got the grey markers just above me. I'm keeping an eye on them on the off chance that they're not the Fokkers from earlier on, but I'm pretty sure that's exactly what they are. Unfortunately, they're flying away, so you're not going to get the CD target identifiers actually come up as they slowly cruise into range. So it was a nice relaxing flight all the way back into base, just beginning to descend slowly, controlled. Nothing too much of a rush at the moment. There are a couple of aircraft just ahead of me, grey markers again, but so close to the airfield I'm pretty sure at this point that they're friendly. I'm not exactly worried. At least I was pretty sure until I saw the red flare. Now, red flares indicate hostile aircraft, so there is a hostile aircraft somewhere within range of the airfield at this point. And the only thing I can see is those markers. 1 kilometre out. There's one thing about World War I dogfights, nothing ever happens quickly. And as we slowly pull in towards 600 to 700 metres range, we finally get the markers, and they are in fact 2 friendly Fokkers. They're exactly what I thought they were when I was scoping them out for range. Now, where's the enemy aircraft? Well, I actually saw them before. If you paused exactly on the moment I looked at the sun above me, you would have seen a couple of black dots. There is actually 2 Allied bombers at about 2 kilometres directly above us at the moment. Now, there's no way no one can get up there and get to them, and they were just passing through the area, but they still set off the airfield alarm. I imagine it's actually a scripted event just to get your attention right as you're coming to land, but nonetheless, you see how the flare system works in Rise of Flight now. So there's nothing left to do but to put this old bird back on the ground again so the officers can get on the piss. Now, you remember how I was talking about the windsocks before? Well, you can check them from the air before you come into land as well, and I didn't. So, this is going to be a rough landing. Well, not the worst landing I've had, considering I was landing in an almost 90-degree crosswind. And that is the completion of the mission. As I said, not the most action-packed first mission, but consider this a promise that there will be more Rise of Flight on the channel in the future, and hopefully at a time when I'm able to talk correctly. Until then, click like if you do, subscribe if you want to see more. Fly smart, fly safe, and I'll catch you in the skies.